two patterns that would be indicative of a ghost of competition past having existed would be either resource partitioning, that is the observation that the resource needs of a particular organism are different than others that occupy the same community, or character displacement. And character displacement is basically saying that there are features of the organism itself, biochemical, physical, morphological, that differ between two species, and those differences allow them to utilize the resources that are there in slightly different ways. And so you get resource partitioning often because you also get character displacement. But these are two different manifestations. I've already talked about an example that looks at resource partitioning, things that might look like this. If you look at an individual plant and where organisms feed on that plant, some might be feeding on the roots, some might be feeding on the leaves as leaf miners, some might be stem boring, others might be feeding inside of the seeds. These would all be examples of resource partitioning. Not all of them are feeding on the same thing. And the reason for that is that if they were, they would be subject to competition. And one species would do better than the other one. At least there would be selection for one species to get better at utilizing that resource so that it could persist in the face of the other species that are trying to do the same. Here's an example with bark beetles. Bark beetles utilizing the same exact tree here. There are some that are specialized to feeding on the lower part of the bark. There are some that are specialized to feeding on the tips of the branches, whereas others are kind of here in this mid part of the canopy, and maybe they feed in slightly different ways. And these are examples, the spatial partitioning are examples of ways in which competition may have shaped the utilization of this shared common resource. Some of this differentiation can even be seen at a much finer scale with certain aphid species here, or actually these are leaf hopper species, some of them specializing to feed right along the midrib or along the leaf margins, whereas others, like these open circles here, are specialized to feed in the middle of the leaf. Maybe there's a space consideration, or maybe there's just slightly different nutrient requirements that these species have that allow them to persist in these slightly spatially differentiated areas. And these are right next to each other. Similarly, this is another example with leaf hoppers. Leaf hoppers may be present at different times during the season. This is, over the course of the summer from May until the fall here, different species emerge either early or, like this one here, emerge late. And this temporal displacement may be something that allows these species to minimize the competition between them. Now again, whether this actually is a consequence of competition or has to do with something completely different is really hard to test. But these are the kinds of data that people would point to say competition is important in herbivorous insect communities. Another example that you can point to say that competition may have been occurring is through character displacement, through evidence of character displacement. And this is basically when in a situation where two species that occupy the same place geographically, you would expect that in the areas where they overlap the most, that physical attributes or biochemical attributes that they have would be slightly different in such a way that the way that they utilize resources in those areas would be slightly different. And this would minimize the types of interactions that, negative interactions that they otherwise would be experiencing. And this is focusing on a specific characteristic of the organism, not just the resource use more broadly. And again, you would expect the peak here of the organisms to be further apart in places of sympatry, that is where they co-occur, than they might on their own. Here's an example of this phenomenon of character displacement that comes from these beautiful beetles here with these complex horns, particularly in the males, that are used for fighting and jousting for females. Actually, this is a beetle that even Darwin recognized, and he has this wonderful description saying, if you could just imagine one of these male Calcosoma with this polished bronze coat here and its vast complex horns magnified to the size of a horse or even a dog, it would be one of the most imposing animals in the world. It's wonderful to have that visual, kind of shrinking yourself down to the size of one of these beetles and being confronted with it eye to eye. Beautiful from here, but quite terrifying, I'm sure, if you were there in person. And in the middle, there are some places where they actually occur in symmetry. Both species can be found at the same time, and there's some others out here. What they did is they actually measured the size of the body, because this is proportional to the size of the big antlers that they have, and presumably also gives them advantage over females and over other males that are just present on the substrates. And what you can see here for these two different species, Caucasus and Atlas, that when they occur in allopatry, for example, Caucasus, the darker one in these parts here of Java, and Atlas over here in these parts of Sumatra and in the Philippines here, when they occur in symmetry, they're much more similar in size than when they occur in when they occur in allopatry, they're much more similar in size than when they occur in sympatry, where Caucasus becomes, it tends to be larger, and Atlas tends to be smaller in these areas. Here you can see that body length is related to the horn length here. And again, you can see that these allometric differences, the bigger you are, the bigger the horn you have, are true for both species. When they're in symmetry, they're very similar. And when they're in symmetry, they're very similar. And when they're in allopatry here, they're actually quite differentiated, with the Caucasus being much bigger than the Atlas. And this is roughly what it looks like if you were to take a representative beetle when they occur in symmetry compared to where they occur in allopatry. Caucasus getting bigger, relatively speaking, and Atlas actually becoming relatively smaller. Similar types of relationships have been seen with other groups, including ants. Here along the x-axis, in this study by Davidson, she found that the more different kinds of ants, as diversity of seed-feeding ants goes up, what you tended to find is that the mandible width tended to become more, have a narrower range, be less diverse within a species, similar to the pattern that you saw with the Atlas. And mandible length here is relevant for these species as a character, because this is what determines what kinds of seeds they can actually grab and bring back to the nest. So what you actually find is that when there's more species, the range of mandible widths tends to be narrower, perhaps an indication of character displacement as they specialize on a certain subset of seeds, therefore displacing the likelihood that they're actually competing for the same resource. They get better at handling smaller seeds, for example. So these are all examples of the consequences that one might expect if competition was actually playing an important role in natural communities. Character displacement and differentiation in resource use, niche differentiation. Now, of course, these are just patterns that we're observing in nature, and really misses the important question of, is this actually a cause and effect relationship, which is kind of dogged studies of competition since the origins of this particular field. Now, what happened after about the 1970s is that this field made a phase shift. It became much more experimental, and researchers actually started to investigate much more rigorously whether the mechanisms of competition, that is, reduction in fitness, actually are playing out, and what are the features that cause certain species to be more or less successful in the presence of others that with whom they share a potential resource. And here you can see the mandible size distribution here for one particular species, Veramesser, when it's in the presence of a different species here. And here you can see kind of the character displacement, where the average and the variation of the mandible size is significantly different and skewed from that of the local potential competitor seed feeder here. So in each time, the local one of the other species has a very different mean distribution than the one that is depicted here. Again, evidence of character displacement.